In the book, Selling Water by the River, the author talks about religious beliefs and boundaries as riverbanks and how we always need to be moving beyond the riverbanks. Here's what he says. The disconcerting part about the life and teachings of Jesus is that he repeatedly pushed, subverted, and overturned the established beliefs and boundaries of religion. Jesus wasn't opposed to the riverbanks. He just knew that eventually the river runs and merges with the expansive and untamable ocean, the experience of life that resides beyond the limits of doctrine, boundaries, and fear. Last August, we traveled down to South Florida to visit family and see my sister and brother-in-law. They have a paddleboarding company in Florida, and on this particular morning, we got up early with the sunrise to go do some paddleboarding, and it was me and my wife Tammy and our oldest daughter Selah, who's 8 years old, and it was my sister and her two twin daughters, same age as Selah. And my sister, she was so excited because she was bringing us to Big Hickory Island. And in order to get to Big Hickory Island, you put your paddle boards into the brackish water. And the brackish water is like these little canals and rivers that go into the wide open ocean. And it was the perfect morning. I mean, perfect weather, perfect temperature, perfect, no wind. The water was like glass. And we paddled for a long time. Then we finally arrived at Big Hickory Island. And I knew why my sister was so excited. Because this place was beautiful. We were the only ones there. White sand beaches. Beautiful blue water as far out as you could see. And see, when you'd get in the water, you could walk out as far as you wanted to. And it was only up to your knees or maybe at the deepest point, your thighs. And so here we are. We're all playing in the water. And Selah says to me, "Poppy, can I take off my life jacket?" Perfect weather. Water's like glass. It's shallow. She's a decent swimmer. "Yeah, baby, you can take off your life jacket. Just be careful." Me and Tammy and my sister, we start walking out to the sandbar in the distance. Still only up to our knees. And we get almost there and we turn around and we see that Selah and Maisie, my niece, same age as Selah, they had drifted down beach quite a ways. And we thought, well, that's weird because there's no current here. But apparently there's one there. And where that current was, it was apparently significantly deeper than where we were. Water was well over their heads. And in that moment, Maisie started screaming, "Help! Help! Selah needs help and I can't help her! Help!" And as you can imagine, we start swimming as fast and as hard as we possibly could to make it back their direction. And at one moment I stop and I look up and Selah's still struggling to keep her head above the water, and her head goes underwater for about 3 seconds and then it pops back up and then it happens again, and it was the absolute scariest moment of my life as a pops. And in the distance, in the corner of my eye, I see this island that's adjacent to us. And there was a guy, and he must have heard all the commotion, and he jumps in and starts swimming as hard and as fast as we were. And he was a bit closer to Selah. And so he got there a few seconds before us. And I watched him boost her up onto the land. Whew. And then we got there. Selah was gasping for air. He was gasping for air. We were gasping for air. None of us could breathe. And I don't know his name, but I'll never forget the brief conversation. "Thank you for saving my daughter's life." And he said, "Oh, no worries." And he looks at Selah and says, "Are you okay?" She says, "Yeah, I think so." He jumped back in the water and swam back to his island. And see, what I remember is the moments after that. For several minutes, us 3 adults and 3 kids, we just sat on that beautiful white sandy beach overlooking the beautiful blue ocean, and no one said a word. Complete silence for several minutes. Because, see, it was the moment where you knew there was more going on here. It was the moment where you knew that somehow life is profoundly interconnected, that life is all connected. And it was a moment we were being pulled into more complexity, more depth, more unity. You've probably had moments like these. You know, last Tuesday afternoon, I was up at Littleton Hospital and I sat with my friend Andrew. And see, Andrew, he was going through another round of chemo last Tuesday. 6 months ago, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Doctors gave him 2 to 6 months to live. Last week marked 6 months. So I think in medical terms we say he is currently kicking cancer's booty. Now my friend Andrew, he has this unique ability to tell these really heavy stories, and he makes them light and he makes them extremely humorous. So for an hour while sitting with him through this chemo treatment, I'm rolling in laughter and crying due to laughter. And at some moments it felt completely sacrilegious to be laughing at what he was talking about. But see, he had this ability to talk about the heavy with the humor. And he's telling me the story of back when he was a king on Wall Street back in New York City, and what it was like to roll in the limousines with the endless supply of drugs and booze and women. And then he stops the story because he also had the ability to drop these spiritual wisdom bombs. And he stops and he says, "Yeah, but my life without God is nothing." Well, that was an abrupt turn. A good one, but abrupt. My life without God is nothing. And a few years ago, I was given the gift of sobriety. And then look at me now, 6 months ago, I'm given this extra gift of cancer. What? I mean, really, I stopped him in this conversation. I said, "Dude, you just lost me in that story. I was with you until, I think I get that your life is nothing without God and the gift of sobriety, but dude, do you see where you are? What do you mean getting cancer is an added gift?" And he says, "Oh, Ryan, that's easy." He says, "Because you see, everyone is going to die. And everyone knows they're going to die. I just know about when I'm going to die." And he said, for the last 6 months, since this diagnosis, I have woken up every single morning and I get to tell my 10-year-old boy that I love him. That didn't happen before this. Whew. A moment where you know there's more happening here. A moment where it's like a new creation is bursting forth right here in the midst of this creation. And it's a moment that was pulling us into more complexity, more depth, more unity. And it's a moment where you know that everything, all of life is somehow profoundly interconnected. And see, that's what I think is happening in this story with Jesus turning water into wine. It's a moment that's pulling us and inviting us into more complexity, more depth, more unity. It's a moment that is bursting forth with a new creation right here in the midst of this one. It's a moment where I think Jesus is shouting to the people, "Don't y'all get it? Everything is spiritual. Everything is a God moment." But it's an odd miracle, isn't it? Now let's just get honest with it. It's an odd miracle, especially for it to be the first miracle. Jesus shows up at a party, the wine runs out, and he makes more wine. And this is his first miracle. It's like Jesus is invested in helping people maintain their buzz. Here's why it's odd, because we could judge miracles by asking what would happen if this miracle didn't happen. Feeding of the 5,000, I think I get it. If this miracle didn't happen, then the people starve. Jesus healing a blind man, I think I get it. If this miracle didn't happen, then the man couldn't see. Jesus turning water into wine, if this miracle didn't happen, people get sober. What's going on here? Surely there's more to the story. So I want to, before we jump into the story, point out two things in this story, the very beginning and the very end. Here's how the story begins. It begins with this verse: "On the third day there was a wedding." Now keep in mind, you see stories all over the Gospels starting with "on the third day." It is a huge heads up from the storyteller. John the storyteller is saying, pay attention. Remember what happens on the third day. This is the day where new life happens. This is where the new thing happens. Think of resurrection and Easter on the third day. By the way, where is it happening? At a party. Because the kingdom of God stuff is always about a big party. Second, here's how the story ends. It's the very last verse. Next slide, please. This was the first miraculous sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory to his disciples. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, this word glory, we have talked about it here before. It is not just some fancy religious term that they randomly threw in because they didn't know what to do there. This term is packed and loaded full of meaning. Keep in mind, Jesus is Jewish. That means his ancestors are the Hebrew people, the ancient Hebrew people of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. They had a word to describe the moments where they were deeply aware of the significance of things, and it was this word, kavod, K-A-V-O-D. We've talked about this word before. It's a word that's often used in the scriptures to describe God's glory. It's the thing that happens when you are overwhelmed with the sense that there is more going on here just below the surface. Kavod says pay attention because this moment holds weight. It holds significance. This moment matters. It's a moment that is pulling us into more complexity, more depth, more unity if we allow it. How does the story end? His glory is revealed. Again, the storyteller is giving us a heads up. Pay attention because there's a moment in this story that holds weight. It's a significant moment. You don't want to miss it. Kavod, glory being revealed. All right, are you ready to jump into the story? John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Here's how it goes. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. When the wine ran out, Jesus' mother said to him, "They don't have any wine." Jesus replied, "Woman, what does that have to do with me? My time hasn't yet come." Fellas, don't talk to your mothers that way. There are some cultural nuances here that we won't get into, but it's never a good idea to talk to your mother that way. His mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby were 6 stone water jars, pay attention here, used for the Jewish cleansing ritual, each able to hold about 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them with water to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some from them and take it to the head waiter." And they did. The head waiter tasted the water that had become wine. He didn't know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The head waiter called the groom and said, "Everyone serves the good wine first. They bring out the second-rate wine only when the guests are drinking freely. You kept the good wine until now." This was the first miraculous sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Remember, how does the story begin? On the third day, something new is happening at a party. How does it end? Glory being revealed, kavod. This moment has significance and weightiness. So you read the story, where's the new thing? I mean, where's the kavod moment? Where's the weighty moment? In those days, wine was carried in one of 2 containers. Either what's called a wineskin, it was a small container made out of animal skin, or in these, what's called an amphora, or plural is amphorae. Here's some first century amphorae. Now you'll notice, these were very common in large gatherings, by the way, and you'll notice the opening was large enough to make it easy to refill. The opening was also small enough to where you could cork it, to make it easy to transport it. And they had handles on these clay jars that would make it easy to pour the wine. So are you getting a picture of the scene here? They're at a party, the wine runs out. Uh-oh, what are we going to do? At the party, there would have been several empty amphorae lying around. If Jesus wanted to make more wine, why not make them in those? No. Jesus wants to get complicated. The text tells us he sees 6 stone jars in the corner. Yeah, that's the ones I want. 6 stone jars. Do you remember the detail John gave us? The kinds used for the Jewish ceremonial cleansing. Someone's Siri just went off. Here's a stone jar that would have been used for Jewish ceremonial cleansing. Tall, about 4 feet tall, just as wide, thick walls, essentially immovable. Why does Jesus want the wine in that and not the wine jars? Fascinating, isn't it? And you know there were people at the party when Jesus started doing this, at least in that area, they were saying, wait a minute, what's he doing? He can't do that. He can't go messing with the purity water like that and trying to make wine out of our purity water. He can't mix those two things. What's he doing? Because see, for their religious system, the system told them that you were either pure or you were impure. And if you were impure, then you needed to go do a cleansing ritual to become pure again, then you could join the party again. So this would have been used throughout the party. What's he doing? Now, it all, for them, for these first century people, it all revolved around purity. And purity, this system was established through separation. So you could have two things. They would both be clean, but the moment they came in contact with one another, they'd become unclean. And the moment you came in contact with it, you too would become unclean. It's the idea of you can eat meat and you can eat milk products, but you cannot eat meat and milk products together. That means cheeseburgers are out of the question. Why? Because meat comes from something that is dead. Milk comes from the living. You would never mix the two together. You would never confuse the categories of life and death. They don't go together. Water in stone jars, good. Wine at a wedding, good, necessary for celebration. Making water out of wine, mixing the two, both are defiled. You come in contact with it, you become unclean. Do you see what Jesus is doing in this story? He goes out of his way to mix two things that should have remained separate. By turning the water in the purity jars into wine, he contaminated both according to the religious rules. What makes this miracle so extraordinary isn't that he was able to perform some magic and turn water into wine, but it was him moving completely beyond the religious boundaries. Jesus, like in so many other stories, was pulling the story forward, showing us that all of life is somehow profoundly interconnected, that this moment matters and God is in this moment. And when we start to live lives that are categorized and separated, we miss it. We miss the new thing. We miss the new creation. We miss glory being revealed. We miss kavod. So, where have you experienced those moments of God's glory being revealed? Kavod. And aren't they usually moments where the categories are getting all mixed up? Aren't they usually the moments where you are being pulled into more complexity, more depth, more unity? Like sitting on a beach in Big Hickory Island on the beautiful sand, beautiful ocean blue water. Guy jumping into the water, saving my daughter, having no words, sitting in silence, and yet hearing that still small voice that says, yeah, Ryan, that's because life is all profoundly interconnected. You do not exist apart from one another. This moment matters. And see, maybe you've had moments like this. Moments where the categories in your life were blending together, and somewhere along the way you were taught not to talk about certain experiences or certain things that went on in your life. And these moments are bad and these moments are good, so you have some throwaway experiences. But maybe also somewhere along your way, God was reminding you that every moment is spiritual, that God is in all of these moments, the pain, the fear, the unknowing, the uncertainty, the people you encountered along the way. Like sitting in a chemo room with my friend who was able to blend the categories of humor and holiness and heaviness. Yeah, Ryan, all of life is profoundly interconnected, and this moment matters. You see, the way of God is always about pulling the story forward. It's Jesus saying the party is way bigger and better than you could ever imagine, and everyone is welcome at this party. You don't have to keep leaving the party to somehow get right with God or somehow become clean and pure. You're already clean. You're already right with God. You're already at the party, and God is at the party with you, with us. Everyone is invited, which, by the way, that's why when you see exclusion happening based on someone's color or ethnicity or religion or sexual orientation or gender, something inside you says, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel very of God. Of course you have that feeling, because it's going against God's natural movement in the world. I'll close with some words from Martin Luther King Jr., which I think is some of his finest writing, from the letter from Birmingham jail that he wrote April 16, 1963. Story of water turning into wine, if you know what I mean. He said, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to color children. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Water from the purity jars being turned into wine. And see, I think what King was saying was the categories are messier. The categories must be blended. And see, you know, there were some at the party who were sitting back in the corner, and if we're honest, there's still some people at the party sitting in the corner saying, wait a minute, he can't do that. They can't do that. What are they doing mixing the categories like that? Some things are just meant to be separate. You see, I think King was saying there's more going on here. It's not about an amusement park. It's not about a television. There's more going on here, and he was in that moment pulling us into more complexity, more depth, more unity, reminding us that all of life is somehow profoundly interconnected. My brothers and sisters, are you willing to imagine having a more connected life? One where you realize that all of it matters. You don't have any throwaway experiences, because all these experiences have formed and shaped you. Are you willing to imagine a world that's more interconnected, where we realize how profoundly interconnected our lives are, that we don't exist apart from one another? Even the people who aren't like us. And may we be reminded that when this kingdom of God stuff comes together, we can create something beautiful. Amen.